I think let's get going. There's quite a lot to cover, if that's all right with you, Dan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's do
Okay,
it.
so I'm going to kick this thing off. Um, so just before we begin, just a huge shout out to VES London for sponsoring these sessions and Clear Angle Studios, who provided a whole bunch of data for us to look at. It's very rare to get production quality data, scan data and things like that, imagery behind the scenes kind of thing. So they've provided a ton of stuff for us to play with, essentially. If I've got my video on, it doesn't matter. So yeah, so huge thanks to VES London and Clear Angle Studios. I just do a quick introduction of myself, and I'll let Dan speak for himself because he knows himself better than I do. Um, so just quickly, this is actually, I don't know which masterclass this is. I think this is like 11 or 12, and it's the first one I'm actually running. I've been just hiding behind the scenes. So a bit of my background. I am a VFX trainer, I would say. I tend not to do much production work other than personal projects, and actually, I'm doing quite a bit of production work at the minute for a few car companies. Um, but mainly, I do training, so I kind of teach people to go on set. The bulk of that training is done in Double Negative in London, where I work with Dan on on-set training, actually, amongst other things. So I was a trainer there while they were working on shows such as Avengers, Endgame, Superman, Pacific Rim, and that involved getting artists ready for production, and also helping out with things like naming conventions, all the behind the scenes bland things to make a pipeline workable, essentially, and make artists able to pass data through the pipeline in a smooth way. And then in the background, well, this is now my main thing, is I go to a lot of universities, colleges, and a few companies to do talks on 3D related stuff or VFX related stuff. Most of what I'm discussing, and a lot of this talk actually is to do with observation, really, and analysis, and capturing evidence to then put into the CG work. And you'll probably hear me repeat that stuff over and over. So that's that. And then I did a lot of articles, tutorials for magazines, books in the past as well. So 3D Artist, 3D Total, 3D Creative, and so on. And then, yeah, my current thing that I'm doing in the background is I do a lot of work for car companies. So Bentley, car configurator. So does anyone own a Bentley? Dan, you've got a couple?
Just a few, just a
Um,
couple of runarounds.
yeah, if you have, and the color is not quite what you thought it was going to be, that was my fault. So I apologize. I know you spent 150 grand and the blue's not quite the blue you wanted, but again, we're always improving that stuff. And then I'll pass it over to Dan.
Hello. As it says here, VFX Onset TD. I've been going off and onset for the last 5 years with Double Negative, or DNEG as it's now called, ranging from asset capture, data wrangling, helping Jay out with training. In between shoots, I'll be working on a shot-by-shot basis, either in layout, done a stint of body tracking and other bits and pieces, planning shoots and that sort of thing. It's shorter and sweeter than Jay's vast resume there, but yeah, there's some pictures of me messing about in different places. A few of the films that I've been working on recently and from the past, you can see there. Each one of these needed me to do very different things, from on-set capture, LiDAR scanning, photogrammetry, all the way to look dev capture and many more different things.
Cool. And yeah, the reason I wanted to pull Dan in is we work closely for the onset training a lot, and where I do maybe more of the, here's how you capture a HDRI. Dan's got a lot of the real world onset. He's there for 3 months, 4 months, etc. experience. So if you want to ask questions about life on set, Dan is my go-to person for that kind of thing as well, because he's been through that mud. When I go on set, I do smaller projects, essentially. I'm going on set actually next Monday. I went on set, I think it was February before lockdown, in Barcelona, and that was a smaller shoot. So you're talking 20, 30 people. So completely different environment to a set full of 100 people, different pressures as well. So Dan's definitely got that experience to answer those kind of questions. If you have anything about life on set, let's call it. Cool. So we're going to jump in. The aim of this session is mainly to cover these two things. So what do you need to capture on set, and how will the data be used in production? We're not going to go through and kind of show you, here's how you capture a HDRI, here's how you do a panorama. We're happy to answer questions on those things that we can cover quickly, but we don't have the time to kind of take you through the steps for doing such things, because each one, I would say, would take a number of hours to kind of cover with enough detail. So it's just to give you a broad scope of what to capture on set, and then how that data is used in production. I should also say, I'm probably going to say you should capture more on set than you'll ever be allowed, primarily because you just won't have the time. That's going to be your biggest kind of blocker. So when I'm going on set, again, I do smaller projects, I'm able to capture more data in the time I have, because I just have that luxury. So I'm going to show you a lot of stuff. I'm going to say it's a good idea to capture this and a good idea to capture that, but in reality, what you don't want to do is go up to the first AD or the director and say, no, I still need an hour to capture my stuff, while they're trying to pack away and so on. So just be aware of, don't think this is the sort of thing you want to then present to people and say, I need to capture X, Y, and Z because I've been told to. It's all going to depend on time. But hopefully before you go on set, you'll have that luxury and that conversation to discuss what you need to capture, and they'll discuss how long you'll have to capture that data.
Very true. And time management is one of the most important skills that you can learn, especially on set and in VFX in general. Making sure that you can organize in smooth operations of what you need to capture as and when you need it, whether that means doing an extra day for asset capture or making yourself known for HDRIs after shots, that sort of thing.
Yeah, if
open discussions.
Sorry, Dan.
It's just about communication, time management, and expectations between different departments on set.
Communication. Yeah, that's a key word, I would say, even though I probably spelled it wrong. I think it's right. Yeah, usually on set, if you say, can I capture a HDRI, they might say, how long do you need? You can capture a HDRI, let's say, in 2 minutes, less than that, really, depending on lighting. But I would always double it. If they say, how long do you need? It takes 2 minutes, say you need 5 to 10, whatever, because at least that way you've got time to make an error and then correct it. So I would always double it if they say, how long do you need? But yeah, communication is going to be key for everything. So the aims, or the things we're going to look at, I've split into, essentially, we've got data acquisition and data wrangling. As much as you'd want a couple of people on set to kind of manage this stuff, you'll probably find, again, depending on the shoot and the schedule and the team, this could be a 1-person role, or this could be a 4- or 5-person role. It really does depend on just the kind of setup of your show. I remember training someone up once, and we learned everything essentially, but they were told the day before there's going to be that person I trained, and then they're going to have a supervisor with them as well. There's going to be one shoot team, so they won't have to do all of this stuff. And then what happened as soon as they got on set, the set split into team A, team B, and she had to basically end up doing a bit of everything really on their own for the first time. So you do really have to be prepared for anything on set. They'll just, things change quickly. So. But yeah, we're going to cover HDRIs, panoramas, capturing geometry reference, texture reference, look dev, and then motion reference. That's, I would say this is the bulk of stuff you need for kind of asset-based captures. There's some shot stuff in there as well, but it's mainly, let's say, asset plus some shots. And then all of this stuff is going to be very useful for shots, lens grids for undistorting the plates, witness cameras for match move, camera tracking, camera reports, again, match move, camera tracking, roto prep, green screen setup, tracking, and so on. I've also got a couple slides at the end on virtual production. We won't go into it in much detail, but I do want to just kind of mention it and touch upon it and how it fits in, let's say, to the VFX pipe. And before we crack on, I do just want to cover, just show you this really. And the reason I brought this up is when people think about data on set, sometimes they forget about how it affects everyone almost downstream. You know, this is the kind of capture side of things. This is where you process that data, but this pretty much goes to every department. You know, what you're capturing on set is basically, you know, the evidence that everyone else downstream is going to use to prove why it should look the way it should look, or why it should move the way it should move. So without that information, you're basically guessing. And the whole point of, you know, on-set capture is to remove the guesswork. If you can get rid of this thing, then everyone is working from the same book essentially. That's the aim. Someone's just said it's 1 a.m. where they were. So Harish, thanks for joining us at 1 a.m. Oh God.
Good morning, I suppose.
But yeah, so what you're doing on set is you're capturing evidence essentially. You know, and you don't really have time to kind of flap about. Your role is to be the person who documents what's happening on set. You've got to capture as many notes as you can, diagrams, you know, floor charts, measurements, all of that stuff is going to then feed into what everyone else is doing downstream. So it isn't a kind of a role where you just, you know, fumble around, do your thing and then walk away. You are kind of responsible to capture everything for everyone else back in the office. That's
the thing. You're the primary person that knows everything that's going on a second by second basis on set. The 200 artists that are going to be working on that shot, which you take 40 minutes to capture, everybody wasn't there when you were. So you have to make sure that you have an array of data to give to them, so they know as much as you knew at that moment in time.
Yeah, without a doubt. So we're going to just quickly cover standard, let's say, camera kit. I wouldn't say this is the camera kit to have, but this is kind of what I take on set. There's a few bits in here that maybe I take that I don't have. I've also got a few things that I'll mention that I rarely use, but I have as just in case I need them, really. So the standard thing I take is I use a Canon 5DS actually. The reason I use this camera, and again, you can use a Nikon, you can use a Sony camera, whatever's gonna work. The reason I use this one is it allows you to take 7 brackets by clicking one click. So that allows me to take the HDRIs essentially. With one button press, it will take all 7 images. The 5D Mark II, I think, allows you to take 3 brackets. So although you can get a HDRI with that, it's a lot more convenient to do it with something that allows 7 or more, I would say. But yeah, this allows you to capture 7 in one hit.
Canon is definitely the easiest to navigate to get to those settings, whereas Sony is 43 buttons to get to bracketing settings. So, I mean, Canon, I swear by Canon because it is so simple. And once you get used to using a Canon, you know all the settings off by heart, and it becomes muscle memory.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I still don't know where everything is in the menu, but yeah, muscle memory is what I do remember, so I can just quickly flip through it and find what I need. So I've got a standard tripod here. I usually take two tripods, one for HDRI, and so it's ready to go, and the other one for just point and click, photogrammetry, textures, anything else. So you're good to go, really. This one takes the longest to set up because you're going to use the Ninja nodal with it, which is this thing here. And if you have to keep taking that off and then putting that back on, it just becomes painful. So having a backup tripod that you can quickly use for bits and bobs is really useful, especially if you're on set, because you don't quite know when you can run in and capture your HDRI. You have to wait until they've done their thing, the shoot team have got their shot. So you have to be ready to go essentially, because they're not going to give you much time.
Yeah, it's always good to have I have a second camera that I leave set up just for the HDRI. So I have a Mark III tripod nodal Ninja ready to go. So any other reference cameras or texture cameras that you might have additional to that then you know always that you're ready to go with the HDRI whenever it needs.
And then I've got a series of prime lenses. I would recommend prime so you can shoot your textures and your look dev reference and everything's kind of locked and fixed. And when they're using that data back in the office, they can undistort it easily. They don't have to figure out if it had some kind of zoom on there. It's useful to have a zoom for, again, general point and click reference if you can. So as the shoot's going on, you can kind of take some shots in the background when it's quiet, when people are moving around and so on. But definitely recommend prime. I tend to have in the bag 100mm, a 50mm, a 35, a 24. I don't have a 200 at the minute, but I would like one. And yeah, 200 macro and 100 macro would be nice. I need to get one of those. And then if you do want to zoom, something like a 70 to 300, or was it 200, would be useful. And then you've got your chrome ball. We'll discuss what that's used for later on. Gray ball, which again, mainly lighting, look dev reference. Your Macbeth charts. I've got a mini Macbeth here and the large Macbeth. The mini one's useful for if you're doing small props and assets. When you framed up on your asset, if it's quite small, you can just drop the mini Macbeth chart in there, where if you then have to drop a big Macbeth chart in there, you might not capture the whole thing. So I like to have a mini one ready to go as well. Other things I've got is a kit, let's say, for handling your balls. The reason this stuff is useful is when you're shooting your brackets, it doesn't move, so everything's still. And also, when you're on set, you might not have another human being around to hold your Macbeth chart and your balls. Sorry for my ropey drawing. This is our little assistant.
Ready to go. Look at him.
Look at him. Yeah. So you might not have an assistant. So having a kit that allows you to kind of plug it into place and then click the button is very useful.
And there's different methods you can achieve that, like similarly to the next slide where you've got the miniature balls. In some cases, I've, when it's just been myself, fashioned small balls and a Passport Macbeth actually to a magic arm onto the tripod. So you can swing it into frame and swing it out as and when you need to.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, actually here it would be nice to have a couple of mini smaller balls as well, because sometimes these big balls, they're just too big, if you especially if you're doing small interior shots and reference, on a table or something. So lots of balls. Again, the only reason I put this on, by the way, and usually when I'm demoing this in person, I try and attack someone. When you're going on set, usually you're carrying a bag that's maybe worth up to £10,000. So there's a lot of cash in that bag, essentially. And once you have everything out, people are attracted to the chrome ball. You'll find if you go to a park and you get the gray and the chrome ball out, they'll start to walk towards the chrome ball and try and touch it. Firstly, you shouldn't let them touch it because it's as clean as possible is ideal. The more dirt you get on this, then the less kind of accurate it is as a calibration sphere, which is what they are. And secondly, if someone obviously spots you've got 10 grand worth of kit on you, they may want to take that from you. So it's good to be able to quickly convert this into a fearsome weapon that you can bash them over the head over. So I don't recommend going around hitting people, by the way, but hopefully you can look quite fearsome with this stuff. But the other thing I would say about going on set, it's good to have two of you because, again, it is a lot of kit you're carrying. I was in Regent's Park once with a couple of people. I don't think you were there, Dan. I think it was James. And this very dodgy looking person came up to us and started asking some dodgy questions. Luckily there was a couple of us there, but if it was just me on my own and I had all of this kit with me, it's very, it's not easy to pack it all up quickly and move. It takes a while to kind of set up and a while to break down. The way I carry my kit is I'm able to do it as a one person job essentially. And then that way I know that when it is packed up and all together, I can pick up the bags and walk away. Because again, just in case you're in an area that is a bit dodgy.
I mean, they're attractive things, especially the Macbeth charts. I've lost a few of them to random passers-by when shooting at night time in London. You get one person that's had one too many drinks, and you're doing a pano from the other side of the road, and then you just start seeing your Macbeth wander off into the darkness. It can be quite frustrating.
Yeah, the Macbeth charts themselves are pretty pricey as well. So
indeed,
yeah, it's not stuff you want taken away. Other bits I've got here, I've got some polarizing filters. For the lenses, cross-polarizing filters, so you can do, we'll look at polarized, unpolarized photography. Measuring tape, always useful. Obviously, you've got lots of apps that you can do to take measurements, but the more you can, well, it's quicker actually to use a measuring tape sometimes. Actually, unless you get like a disto is useful. Yeah, so you can just quickly shoot a laser out and get a measurement.
But it's always good to have a hard ruler or a tape measure there in case you need to do any photogrammetry. You've got scale reference, which you wouldn't get from your disto.
Yeah, as much as you can get. Again, there's loads of reference you can grab from this. I haven't got any gaffer tape, green gaffer tape on here. Again, I would definitely carry gaffer tape around because it's extremely useful just for, again, creating markers essentially. You can use that for photogrammetry and stuff. And then notepads, as much as you want to capture stuff digitally, you'll probably find it's just a lot quicker to resort to pen and paper. So take the digital stuff, but just have a notebook in your back pocket, just in case you need to take a quick note down, essentially. Here's a couple of apps I just picked out. Again, there's a whole bunch of apps that are very useful. The ones I've got here is this Slate app. I was using this in Barcelona, and it was very useful, but then it just got to a point where things were moving so fast, I just ended up using a piece of paper and writing on that quickly. But again, it was useful for photography, taking snaps. This is quite useful for finding out about the sun, where it's positioned, and then this measuring app for measuring everything and anything really. I would use that as much as possible. I'd still tend to measure with the tape measure or the disto. I just take a photograph so I know what I measured, and then I hook them up later on. That's just me personally. You can obviously type the measurement here as well. That's a very small door.
Or even just taking a picture of your tape measure when you're running around, and then doing an overview photo is always good reference as well.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Aitor's asking if we use the satellite app. I got in touch with the satellite people to use the app because it looked fantastic. I still need to chase that up because the problem with going on is the amount of data you end up capturing, processing that and managing that data can become painful. So yeah, the satellite app looks great from what I've seen. I've not used it myself personally. I know a lot of companies have their own kind of directory structures for managing data and processing data. So they have internal kind of things, but I need to check out satellite. It definitely looks good. And Grain is saying highly recommend the satellite app. Those guys are doing a great job. So yeah, definitely check that out, and I'll do the same. Oops. So that's kind of some of the kit you'll kind of take with you on set, let's say, and kind of how on set affects everyone else in the pipeline. I'm going to jump into just kind of focusing on HDRIs now. And again, if you do have any questions about HDRIs as we go, just shout and do jump in. And again, if you have any questions you want to flag a hand up and ask, then again, just shout as we go. So HDRIs, this is what everyone thinks is the most important thing to capture on set. And again, to a point, they are extremely important for both lighting and look dev. But as well as capturing the 360, which is what this is going to be, there's always more data you can capture. So, but what I mean by that is you could capture just the HDRI of this light. If you have area lights in the scene or, physical lights, then you could capture a HDRI of that light as well. But The reason a lot of people will capture just the 360 is, again, on set, they don't give you much time. So therefore, you've got a limited amount of time to capture a very big data set, a very important data set. So the 360 just allows you to do that very quickly. It gives you a 360 idea of where the lights are on set, and also the exposure of the lights and how it illuminates the set as well. So what I've got here is we're going from kind of dark to bright, and therefore we're capturing all the bright bits and everything in the shadow as well. So we capture a good range of lighting information. I'm shooting these at every 90 degrees. That tends to be my kind of default mode of shooting a HDRI. And the reason I do that is I don't want to do too much manual processing later on. I kind of want the software to figure things out for me, in terms of stitching images together. And this has plenty of overlap if you're shooting with a 8mm fisheye lens.
Very true. A lot of people shoot either 3 positions, 120 degrees, which is enough. But I'm the same mindset as you, where I shoot 90 because you've got the overlap, and the stitching is going to be a hell of a lot easier. Melanie asks, aren't 2 90 degrees sufficient? I'm guessing you mean 180, like one side and one the other. With that, there's not enough overlap to stitch the 2 together. So just getting an extra 2 positions, or even an extra 1 position, then you'll have enough overlap to stitch with ease.
Yeah, like Dan said, 2, you get very minimal edges to work with. So, and you'll see me throughout all of this. Again, I'm very much in the favor of capturing more data than I think I need, so I don't have to do so much guesswork and stitching and manual work later on. Chris is asking, have I used the Ricoh Theta? Yeah, I used the Theta when I went to Barcelona, and also a couple other shoots. I found personally I could capture a HDRI with the Canon quicker than the Theta, and the quality of the Canon is obviously better than the Theta as well. So the other thing why I don't use the Theta is anything that I have to use Bluetooth with is not something I'm a fan of, primarily because it takes time to connect the thing. So when I was in Barcelona ready to shoot with the Theta, it took me 10 minutes because it just wouldn't connect to my phone. They just couldn't sync. And I had the same with the drone once as well, which was painful. And that took 30 minutes on a shoot where people were waiting for me to get this damn drone in the air because it was the Bluetooth just kept getting lost. So with the Canon, I know if the camera's set up, I can get this in and out within a couple of minutes. With a Theta, to get the same amount of brackets, again, me personally, it's always taken longer. So
that's true, as well as its versatility. If you have a Canon, you can always change your lens, and then you've got a panorama camera ready to go. Whereas if you've got a Theta, you've only got a Theta. I mean, having a HDRI camera is much more versatile, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Although it does have great uses, because you can capture an environment. You have a 360 image. It's great as a reference tool for me until the technology improves. But
yeah, that's a good point actually. So the Barcelona shoot that I was on, we were in an underground car park, and while I was capturing the HDRI with the Canon, I kept positioning the Theta in different places just so I had reference of the environment. So I was doing just a single snap 360. Moving it around, snapping again. And the same as the crew were doing their thing in between moving the camera and this and that, I would then capture a 360 again, just as reference. So I had an idea of where they were moving the camera, where they were moving the lights, because everything's moving all the time. Well, on a lot of sets. So the more you can, again, capture as just general reference, the better. So the Theta is definitely great for that. But I still find the quality with the Canon is better. Harish is asking at what resolution do you capture HDRIs? As for me, as big as the camera shoots. So the Canon 5DS is around, it's around 8K by 5K or so. I don't know the exact dimensions of the image, but it's 8K by 5K. And obviously you're taking 4 positions, 7 snaps of each. So you get a very big HDRI that you're then able to map onto geometry as well if you wanted to. With the Canon 5D Mark III, I think it's around, what is it, 5K by 3.5 or something. These are just guesstimates. But
the Mark IV is slightly bigger. I think it's just over 4K wide.
But that leads to an important thing is with the 5DS, each image is around twice as large as the 5D Mark III. So therefore, you need a lot more memory cards to save that stuff. So you've got to be aware of how much data you're capturing. So because you don't want to run out of memory cards on set. Cool. So this is just the HDRI. It's 4 positions. Actually, this is the reference. I've got a slate here. Oops. I've got a slate there, which you can't see because it's a bit overexposed on this example. I've got a Macbeth chart. I've got the grey ball and the chrome ball. So the slate is just reference for, you know, when was it shot, where was it shot, and who shot it. Who is quite an important thing, because if the data is dodgy, then, you know, someone needs to be told why and hopefully educated on how to make it better next time. Because I remember when I was taking HDRIs the first time, all my images were super bright. They were blown out basically. And I thought it looked amazing because I was capturing so much light. I basically just had, you know, 3 images that were bright white, thinking that I'd captured all the light in the world. And then someone just told me, you know, gently, they said, there's no information in these images. They're just plain blown out. So stop doing it, basically. So you know, it's important that we can find out who captures data. So again,
and also to find out extra information for in case there was a missed slate, or there was it was associated with a slate or a shot on set, and you needed extra information. You've always got to go to there. You've got someone to speak to about it.
Yeah, and then we have the Macbeth chart. That's going to allow us to grade the HDRI. So that's for grading and exposure. It's when you're doing a HDRI for a particular shot, usually the main camera crew is going to shoot the Macbeth via an ARRI or a red camera. And that's going to capture color differently to your Canon, which is where you've got your reference. So if we can capture the reference of the Macbeth via the ARRI and the reference of the Canon, you can then use you know, gizmos in Nuke like the color target to do a transform to line these up so they have a similar color, a similar exposure, and so on. So that's very important to allow your HDRI to be graded correctly for the shot itself. So then we have the gray ball that just gives us reference about kind of light exposure. Also, a quick note about the gray ball is if you ever get a gray ball and everyone says that's a mid-gray, you know, every gray ball is going to be slightly different. They're going to use a slightly different paint. They might use 2 coats, 3 coats. They might go to B&Q and buy some paint, which is B&Q in the UK is just a department store, home department store. Or they might get some really fancy, expensive paint that is a bit more accurate. It's important that you know that in Maya, Houdini, wherever you're doing your lighting, when you're creating your mid-gray ball, technically in the software, it's going to try and create a perfect, you know, mid-gray, let's say, but you're never going to really match the Onset one perfectly, unless maybe you do a full look dev of that ball. So you take the ball, you photograph it, you do your polarized, unpolarized photography, and you capture, you know, the ball itself as an asset. And then maybe you can create a digital version that matches that. But, you know, as well as we're trying to technically match things, you should also use your eye a bit to grade, to, you know, expose the shots and so on. It shouldn't all just be, you know, color swatch this and say that's it. There's other things you should do artistically to make sure things line up. And this is just reference. It's important that all of this stuff is just reference. Your task as a lighter or a look dev artist or a modeler or a rigger, anything else is to take that reference and then deconstruct it. Sorry, I've really drawn over this, haven't I? Let me clear this out. And then the last thing you have is the chrome ball. And all that's going to do is tell us where the lights are in the scene. So here I can see that we had a light from up here, essentially. You can obviously capture 180 of the ball, or 360, people would say, by shooting the ball itself and then extracting the HDRI from that. That still works, but the quality is never going to be as good because you're going to get loads of distortion. So using an Ingenodal to capture 4 positions is going to give you a better result than shooting this as your HDRI.
Additionally, a note around the 90 degrees. As you can see in these images, the arm of the nodal ninja is slightly peeking in because the distance that you need to bring the lens back to be perfectly center, perfectly nodal. Actually, in some cases, you can see this. With the 90 degrees, you've got enough image to paint that out. If you only had 3.
Yeah, the software will figure it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's another reason that if you capture extra data that takes less than 30 seconds to capture, it will save you a little bit of extra way later.
The other thing with the gray and the chrome is you can create your digital gray and chrome and obviously put it in the same place and check that you're getting the correct shadows, you're getting the reflections happening in the same place as well. So it's, again, very useful reference to match later on. Now, these are the 4 positions of that HDRI that I've shot. So this is pos 1, position 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, every 90 degrees, just so there's enough overlap in the shoot, and it will just stitch nicely. The other thing I just want to point out is you can see here and here, it's quite small maybe on the screen, is I have purposely left the Macbeth chart somewhere in the scene, and the balls as well. And the reason I've done that is I now have 2 references of how the Macbeth responds to light in this environment and how the gray and chrome ball respond to light in this environment. So as well as having this as reference, this is my primary reference, I now have a secondary bit of reference. As long as they're not blocking the light, then I tend to leave them somewhere in the scene. And you should also note that you can't move anything in between these takes because all the stitch won't work so well. But so leave them where they are, but it's useful to have a second reference if you have the time to do that. I'll just check these questions quickly. Can you recommend a free stitching tool for testing? I've only used really PT GUI. I know they do have a watermarked version. I know you can stitch.
There's a free version of that. It has all of the tools, so you can use it through its entirety, but just the rendered output has a watermark on it. But it's fully functional, even the free version.
Yeah, so that's what I use, and because it does so well, I've never actually stepped away from it to try other things.
True.
I'm not sure what else there is on there. Actually, someone's putting PT GUI is free. PT GUI is the one. And someone's asking, can they share this recording, or will it? Yeah, you can share it with your studio. That's fine. It's not a problem from my end. Andre is saying this is about 360s. It depends on the field of view of your lens and whether the 360 can be used for camera projections on a 2D matte painting. So 360 field of view number of tiles. If I'm using an 8mm lens, I would just use that for HDRIs. If it had to be used for matte painting, for like a big panorama, I would use something like a 24mm lens, or maybe a 35mm lens, because you'll get less distortion in the images, and maybe a 50 depending on the environment. I tend not to use the 8mm, so it's going to be used for matte painting, although it can in places. I tend to find it's not as good a quality as using something like that. But yeah, it's doable. Do you bother to take note of light sources such as power output, IES? That's from Kevin Fenimore. Again, if I was on set, I would ask those questions. And if you have time to find out that information, definitely. Again, the more information you get on set, the better. I think you said it best, Dan, earlier with communication. It all comes down to talking with the on-set team, the gaffer, the first AD, the producers, even sometimes, to find out all of that information. The camera team, especially as well. Usually the second AD is a great resource for finding out things about the cameras and the lenses, because they're usually capturing that information as well. So yeah, definitely, if you can get a note of that information, I would do so. Danasa is asking, I know you touched on this earlier, but what is the minimum amount of bracket for accurate CG lighting? I'm not sure.
It's almost not necessarily about the amount of brackets, it's the range, the dynamic range that you can capture. And with two stops apart at 7 brackets, you've got 14 stops of range there. I mean, they're similar, it could be achieved with 3 stops apart and 5 brackets. That way, in theory, you have a 15 stop difference between your low end and your high end. So there's not really a minimum in terms of bracketing.
Yeah, I mean, the sun is a tricky thing to capture because unless you've got polarizing filters and so on, you're never going to get the full range, right? It's extremely difficult. Or unless you can get your ISO and your shutter speed shooting really fast, it's very difficult to get the full range of the sun. But yeah, so I guess that's the important thing that you're trying to capture is that range, which is why when I was capturing HDRIs and they were all blown out at the top end, people were angry because I was just not capturing the range. So these are just, sure, it should play. Oh no, it's just an image. Again, this is just showing reference being captured on set. The reason I put this on there is if when you're taking bracketed photography, if you are holding the Macbeth chart, it's going to move between shots. So it's you're not going to get a set of images where everything lines up correctly. So the data isn't going to be as good. So the more you can get on a stick and hold it up, then the better. It is going to play. There we go. So this is just an example of shooting the reference bracketed, essentially. I've got some more images of this thing as well. So I always shoot the gray and the chrome ball bracketed as well, and the Macbeth chart if you're doing a HDRI, so everything has the same kind of range, dynamic range in there.
It's just going to add extra time if you want to change the settings. I mean, if you've got a ball stand ready to go, you can just need to hit the button again, and then you're ready to rumble.
Oh, sorry, Payman. Okay, I'm going to let someone talk, Dan. Let's see how this goes. Hey, Payman.
Hi,
Jahirul. How you doing?
Good. Sorry, I just was getting busy and I forget about to join this, but I really would like to see this stuff. Hope that you're recording it that I can have it and to watch it later.
Yeah, it's being recorded and I'll upload it later.
Yeah.
Cool.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What's the best method for photogrammetry of the small props? We know how to do the photogrammetry and the LiDAR, actually, but what we do in Vancouver. But what's the best setting for photogrammetry for small props?
We're going to cover photogrammetry in a bit. I mean, if you're doing any photogrammetry, I guess I'll say quickly, my tip is always, get a lot of images and get a lot of overlap. Make sure they're sharp images with not so much depth of field. If you can avoid depth of field, great. Actually, I'll quickly, let me just find an empty trying to find an empty space. The thing I tend to do if you're doing props actually is sorry, I'm just trying to find a bit of space so I can draw something. Let me get rid of that. Again, we'll cover this later a bit. Oops, what's going on? Is if you can, I guess there's 2 ways to do photogrammetry and props because they're small. It's quite neat, let's say. So let's say that's our prop. Firstly, I guess I would put it on something that is high so you can get everywhere, at every angle.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you want to shoot all the way around 360s. So that's the first thing. But the 2 ways are usually, sorry, that's meant to be 1, is you shoot around the asset. So you shoot 360 and you're physically moving and the asset stays still. So this is your camera and the camera moves around the asset. that's the first way. And the second way is going to be your camera, your asset, sorry, stays still, and you rotate the asset on a turntable, and your camera is fixed. And then your camera is going to be fixed from 5 different positions or 6 positions, whatever it is. Now, I shoot both when I'm doing things, because with this method, it's extremely useful because you can use these cameras now for model, texture, look dev, everything lines up. So all departments can use the same cameras. However, if the software figures out that you didn't move the asset, sorry, you didn't move the camera, it's not going to give you a good solve. So all your images end up stacking on top of each other. When you're shooting this way, you need a very clean background, and it almost has to be, you know, as if it's floating in space almost.
Additionally to that, make sure you've disabled either in camera or in your software the GPS location markers. So if you haven't moved your camera, more often than not, the GPS data embedded in the image will get used by the photogrammetry software, and that won't change throughout your image sequence. So if you disable that, it will treat it better as long as you've got a clean background.
Yeah, may I ask what's your favorite photogrammetry software? You know, there's a bunch of them out there, but and everybody talks about or use many of them. Yeah, I just off
Reality capture. Yeah.
Reality capture.
What's the other one? There's a free one which is quite good. But
Meshroom.
What is it?
Meshroom.
Meshroom. Yeah. Oh, it was a question. Which one do we use?
Which one is your preferable? Yeah.
Oh, I personally use this because it's idiot proof for people like me. I know this is better, I would say, right? Well, from most people's experiences.
I tend to use reality capture. Just speed is my favorite thing. If you can get something out quicker. I mean, you do lose a bit of quality sometimes depending on your settings, but I tend to go toward reality capture.
Among all those trees, I think only reality capture would be able to import the LiDAR data along with the photogrammetry.
Yes. Well, I don't know about Agisoft, but yeah, I know reality capture does LiDAR plus your photogrammetry, which is very good.
Plus, Agisoft does 360 capabilities as well, whereas reality capture doesn't. So if you have panoramas or Ricoh Theta images, you can utilize them in photogrammetry if you're doing environments.
But we'll come back to the. We've kind of. I said I wouldn't go on tangent, and I did quite a bit.
I'm sorry.
We can come back to it definitely. So you just talked about HDRIs. Again, these are reference. You can see that's being captured. Reference. The other thing, and this is what the main shoot team should do, is whoever's, again, we've mentioned this before, whoever's shooting through the main camera, Arri, Red, whatever, Sony, whoever's getting the main shots, the main shoot team should also capture, if they can, this stuff. And that stuff should kind of mimic what your CG asset is doing. So if you've got Iron Man walking through, sorry, I should say, this is from Rebellion. This is a recent shoot I went to. It was a virtual production shoot from Rebellion VFX, and it was it was a great little shoot. So they've let me use this data, which is very kind of them, because again, it's very rare to be able to use onset data. But what's happening here is they're mimicking or they're recreating the movement of the main principal CG asset, and that way we get reference again of how these respond to light, how it moves through that lighting environment. Again, it's all about getting additional reference. You can actually see how gray the ball looks here as well, and how tinted and bluish greenish it looks here. And again, so it's very useful for grading, to be able to use this stuff for balancing out your shots. I think someone had a question about color checker. Could you please tell once again about color checker and HDRI? The color checker, if you shoot that through the main camera, let's say that's the Arri, it captures color differently just because the cameras are different to a Canon. So therefore, the Macbeth chart can be used for figuring out what the difference is between the two and matching the color more accurately. The other reason to shoot the Macbeth chart is usually in VFX, we're not dealing with I'm going to get a bigger piece of paper again because I'm going to run out of areas for me to sketch on. I can't think without drawing stuff, so I apologize to have to keep drawing stuff. Okay, so I've got a bit of wiggle room now. So yeah, usually on set or in production, VFX production, let's say, when they have the plates that come in, or the scans, whatever you want to call them, plates, scans, they don't come in, or they'll go to the grading team. Sorry, this is a bigger answer now. I don't know if this is too big, but I apologize. They'll go to the grading team, and the grading team will use the Macbeth chart to create a neutral grade for the sequence. And that neutral grade can be added on top of the shot. The neutral grade is the stuff that goes into VFX. The VFX get neutral graded plates or scans, whatever you want to call them. Now the look that the director wants comes in separately and gets added into this as well. So the Macbeth chart is used by the grading team to get a neutral grade. So mid-gray looks mid-gray, blue looks blue. There's no tint or anything like that. And again, that's what VFX are going to work with. Now with the HDRI, we do exactly the same thing. We take the Macbeth chart, we grade it so it's neutral. So that's neutral. I don't know why that's meant to represent neutral, but it was in my head. So we grade it so it's neutral. And then we have a neutral shot here. So the two of them can hopefully line up more accurately. So in VFX, everyone's working with the neutral graded plate, and then the look is just added on top. And you might add that as a look in your renderer of choice in Arnold, in Clarice, in Katana. The comping team would add the look as well, so they can see what it looks like to get an idea of what that final grade will be. But if we are all working neutral, then it just allows us to work from the same, the same platform essentially. So yeah, it's a calibration. I think Melanie says it's used for calibration essentially. Hopefully that answered it. Or I just waffled on for a while. Okay.
All good information though.
Yeah, I think I went off on a big tangent. Alex is asking, are you using specific lens length to capture HDRIs? Are you positioning somewhere particular? Well, actually, that's a very good question as well. Let me go back to this. So in terms of positioning, let's start with the focal length. Again, I use an 8mm fisheye lens because it allows me to get a lot of overlap and capture a lot of, the environment easily and quickly. You could use a 15mm or whatever else, but you may need to take additional position. So 8mm fisheye lens on a full frame camera is my lens of choice, I would say.
I agree.
Sorry, Dan.
No, I agree. I mean, it gives enough wide because you've got a vertical radius or angle of 180 degrees as well. So you don't have to do additional movement points on your Nodal Ninja.
And then for positioning, I would always try and capture the HDRI from where the CG is going to go. So if your character is going to go here, then I would capture, the CG character. I would capture the HDRI from there, because that way, what you're trying to do is when you set your gray and your chrome ball up as reference, also from here, again, it gives us a very clear idea of how the lighting is in that particular area. If the CG asset was going to go here, but you captured your HDRI back here, then we're capturing slightly, a different take on what the lighting is doing because we're in a different position. So positioning wise, I always try and find out where the CG is going to go. So
it's very true, but in addition, there's sometimes lights can be occluded by sets, depending on whether if you haven't got a specific CG asset that you're going to be utilizing, make sure you position your HDRI where you can capture individual lights, and from your nodal point, be able to see all the lights being used, or as many as possible.
Yeah, so grab as many lights as possible. The other thing I wanted to add to that as well is a lot of the times you'll probably find, not a lot, but many times you'll probably find is you can't actually take a HDRI from where you want to because they just won't let you, or for example, when I was on a car shoot, obviously I wanted to take a HDRI from where the car is, but I'm not going to be able to get them to move the car for me. They're just going to tell me where to go. So you just get as close as you can to where the CG is going to go. Or like Dan says, whatever's going to tell you the most information about the set and the lighting. Because that's what you're trying to do is you're trying to tell the people back in the office that there was a secret light back here, as well as what the asset looks like under those lighting conditions. Do you shoot 7 brackets for each board, color checker, slate? Yes, but I tend to shoot, I know I've got this split here as separate things, but in terms of shooting all of this stuff, I tend to have it all on a rig. So it's just one click and it captures everything. You can put the slate here as well. So one set of images has all of this information in one go. But yeah, I would capture 7 brackets for the reference as well. Cool. Melanie's asking about environment mapping. I'll come back to that question, Melanie, about environment mapping when I've got some other images to show for that. So here's just the result of those HDRIs. So your 360, your 90 positions times 4 is going to turn into a lat long map. And again, hopefully this is going to be something like a 16K by 32K or something else. It should be pretty big. Again, you can see I've got the additional reference here. This HDRI has been graded. So I've used the Macbeth chart to find like a mid-gray value. If we go back here, you can see how warm it is. And then over here, it's been graded to be a neutral grade. And if you want to add some color back into it, then you can, you have that ability. These are from Clear Angle. So just some examples. You can see they've got the reference still in the HDRI, so it's still available. We're seeing all these light sources, which is very important. So we have an understanding of what's happening in the environment.
This is an interesting point, which goes to links to the neutral grade, where you've got so many different colored light sources, especially neon lights, that can distort your gray square. So just relying solely on the gray square is not sometimes the best way to get just a direct neutral grade. There is always an element of creativity and reference to get it to where it needs to be, rather than just relying on software.
Yeah, the reason I wanted to show this one as well is, it's important that we use this stuff as reference. When you have a shot like this, a HDRI, if you map that onto a sphere, which it will be, and light, all of these lights are going to be mapped, in from around here and over here and so on. And that's not how the real world works. So this, again, it's reference. You should actually extract the lights from the HDRI, extract that thing, and then position them in 3D space. So if this was, you would rebuild the set. These are my very crude drawings. You're laughing at my perspective drawing, but in 3D world, you would position that over here in 3D space, and maybe this one over here comes up here. This round one would be down here. So you do have to think about how you're going to use this data later on as well. You can't just map things onto these bubbles and expect a realistic result, although it might look good and it might feel good. It's just not how lighting works in the real world. So do remember that you have to figure out how to then take this data, this reference, and then make it work so it's more accurately representative of what was happening on set. And that comes actually back to projection mapping and stuff like that, which was one of the questions by Melanie, which we'll come to, environment mapping. So we'll come back to that. Massimo is asking, shooting the balls and chart into the HDRI is better than shoot balls and chart with the main camera on set. I would say you want both. Again, the main camera, the reason you capture it for your main cam and your VFX cam, let's call it, that's your onset cam, is you're not going to be shooting with an ARRI for your reference. You're going to be shooting with a Canon. They're going to be shooting with a fancy camera. So therefore, the colors that are captured by the cameras are different. A good way to think of it is I see color differently to the way Dan sees color. So this is Dan, he's got better eyes than me, I'm guessing. I've got glasses. Oh no, Dan, you've got glasses. Okay, anyway, this is how I see color. And if we need to see the same color, we need to transform, one to the other essentially. So the Macbeth chart, you need that information through the main camera and the VFX camera. If you don't have both, again, you're kind of just winging it, which is fine. But if you got both, it's easier to come to.
And that's completely show dependent on whether you're going to get that. I mean, if it's a heavy CG show and balls are needed every shot, if there's definitely going to be a CG character, for instance, there's always going to be a reference plate of a ball. But sometimes different supervisors choose different things. So, for example, environments won't necessarily have a ball, despite its use case for grading and neutralizing to match your HDRI. Sometimes that time offset and getting everybody to wait while you wave a ball around isn't necessarily the best use of time at that point. So there is a definite element of balance depending on what your shot is involved. But normally, if there's definitely a CG character, this is the key one, if there's definitely a CG character, there more often than not will always be a balls pass.
Cool. Mark's just asking, are you shooting RAW or JPEG? Always RAW. Actually, I shoot RAW plus JPEG. So I have something to view, on a laptop, but I shoot RAW as the main data that I'm going to process.
Also, it's not particularly storage friendly to shoot both, but you also have a lighter image to use for a test case if for whatever reason you run into an error and you just want to run off a quick stitch, like your nodal point was off and you just wanted to make sure it would work. It's always good to run a test on a smaller image rather than the raw.
So this is, again, just more examples from clear angle. There's a couple more questions. Jay's asking about if you have a blinking light or a big fire source. Yeah, that's a very good question. I guess if you have a blinking light, what I would do is try, hopefully it's being controlled to blink. If not, then you just capture what you can. But as long as you get a note, blinking light, and then someone else can animate that later on in the office, then that would be great. But if you can keep it so that light that they're blinking on set on purpose, if you can get them to turn it on, at least you can capture a HDRI of the light source, and then you can animate that on and off. If you're doing fire, then you'd probably want to have that as an emissive light source anyway. So shoot the HDRI of the fire, but again, similar to what I said here about extracting these lights, I would want that fire as an emissive light source that I would add digitally, I would say.
Yeah. An interesting story in San Francisco, the Bay Bridge has got loads of twinkling lights, and for when we shot Venom, the lights were controllable and they were controlled, so they were always on for continuity issues, as well as it just made it more convenient for lighting.
Yeah.
Fun fact.
And then Abdul's asking, how do you avoid human ghosting? It's very easy actually to avoid human ghosting. Get rid of the people while you're shooting is my quick answer. If people are moving around, you're not going to be able to get rid of them. You could paint them out, clone them out, but that's post-work. But in general, anything moving is going to be ghosting. Actually, one thing you do have to be careful of is if you're shooting with a LiDAR scanner. Actually, Dan, I think I don't have the image of you shooting with it. If you're shooting with a LiDAR scanner, oops, sorry, where is it gone? There's
one.
Okay. There's a centerpiece in there spinning around very fast. And people, again, like the chrome ball, they're drawn to it and they want to put their finger in it. It's a bit like those fans you have, and you want to put your finger in it. And I've seen people walk up to it again and try and put their finger in this spinning scanner. So when it comes to stuff like that, they're just going to ruin your scan. You end up with a ghosty 3D mesh of a human.
Ruin your scanner by the sounds of it as well. It's a very expensive mirror to replace.
Yeah. So you can, with this LiDAR scan, you can delete the points, but because that person was in the way, you're never going to get that data back because it didn't capture, the surfaces. But with ghosting, you just, tell them not to move if you can. The important thing I would say is, if there's a bit of ghosting here, that's fine. You don't want ghosting in front of the light sources, because that's what you're capturing is the light sources. Like in this example, if there was a bit of ghosting here or a bit over here, like there is with that guy, that's fine, because I'm really interested in the lighting. You want to make sure when you're doing your HDRIs that you don't suddenly have someone blocking the light, because that's the data you're trying to capture. Ghosty people, it's a shame, but yeah. if you want to avoid it, just tell everyone to freeze if you can. So I'm going to plow on. Here's just a few more examples. I know we're kind of running out. Well, we've almost done an hour and we're just in HDRI, so
got a few to go.
This as a part 2 later on. We've seen these examples. This is just reference. I can blast through this pretty quick. Just more reference again for everything, Gray, Chrome, Macbeth for grading later on. Alexis is asking, so you would ask the chart on each take scene to the cameramen's shoot with it with the ARRI. Once they're happy with the shot, yes, I would. Usually you get when you're on set, sorry, the question, I'll say it again because I just mumbled it really, is would you ask the chart to be taken for every take or scene from the cameramen, women to shoot if they're shooting with the ARRI or red? So the main shoot team, the first AD, the director, etc. For every shot that they're happy with, if you're doing a VFX piece, usually before you actually go on set to shoot, you should know which shots are your VFX shots. That should be a conversation that happens with the VFX soup, the director and the DOP and everyone else involved with the camera stuff, first AD and so on. So they will have a conversation to say shot, let's call it 0, 1A. This is a VFX shot, and shot 0, 2B is non-VFX. So for every VFX shot, the conversation should have already happened, hopefully. And at that stage, for that shot, you need your plate, which is going to be the shot with your actors and your, whatever they're trying to film. You will then shoot a reference plate as well. And that reference is going to be your VFX balls and your Macbeth chart.
Clean plate if it's needed.
And a clean plate, yeah. If you can get a clean plate as well, then grab that too. In all honesty, though, the Macbeth chart, ideally, they're shooting regardless if it's a VFX shot or not, because you'll still want to neutralize the sequence so you can grade it evenly later on. So even for non-VFX projects, it's useful. So you can neutralize all the shots into an evenly graded sequence. What I mean by that is this is cloudy at the minute. And let's say in film time, this shot or this sequence is meant to last, 2 minutes. So in film time, this lasts 2 minutes. Sorry, in film time, film time, it's 2 minute sequence. There's 2 people chatting and the sequence is meant to take 2 minutes in screen and film time. In reality, when they're shooting this, it might take 4 hours because the actors keep fluffing their lines. And in that time, this lighting is going to change because you're outside. It might go cloudy, the sun might come out and so on. So in that case, for every shot of that sequence, if you get a Macbeth chart, whoever's grading the piece later on can still make that what was shot in 4 hours feel like 2 minutes because they can grade everything the same essentially. So it's also useful for non-VFX to ensure consistency for your sequences, I would say. So yeah, color, it's really important.
And I've heard stories as well. I think a chap that's in the audience here has told me this. Whereas he was on one show where each slate actually had a Macbeth in it. So at the head of every, or tail, if there's a tail slate, every shot automatically has a Macbeth chart at the beginning or end. However, obviously Macbeth charts can get dirty, and that kind of ruins the point of them. But yeah, there's difference, and there's, in addition to that, I mean, this is talking in ideal circumstances, whereas in reality, it's rare on every show that you would get a ball and a chart on every shot. It would be at the VFX supervisor's discretion.
Yeah.
I mean, the argument is if it's a set extension, is a ball and chart really necessary? Whereas it would be necessary if there was a CG sword that was supposed to come relatively close to camera. That's your use case. That's your perfect scenario where a ball and chart would be necessary, or more necessary.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly what Dan just said is when I'm doing panoramas, usually I don't need to shoot these things because I just want to grade the color. It's not going to be used for lighting. And again, we'll see that later on. But yeah, it's shooting the right stuff for the right purpose, essentially.
Exactly.
Question from Zeki is, do you do your neutral grade after denoising the reference image? How do you denoise the HDRI? I tend to shoot with a solid enough ISO that there's not too much noise in the HDRI. I don't denoise the HDRI. Or I haven't done or haven't had to. Not saying that you shouldn't. You know, a tool I use for denoising in general is Neat, but I try and keep the ISO quite low. I don't shoot over 800 with the camera that I use, but it depends on your camera. I used to shoot with a Canon 5D Mark 1, was it? I forget what it's called. And the ISO on that was pretty terrible. So I think it was Canon, I forget.
It's probably a bad habit, but I tend to just, if not necessarily for HDRIs, I would go as low as possible, but I tend to leave my camera on 400 ISO because modern cameras just have less noise than the old cameras, so it's almost a bad habit, but that's what I use.
There's just another question about neutral grading. This color chart here is what's meant to be known as a mid-gray value. So if you take that into an application and set that as your, you know, when you're shooting, it might actually say it's I don't know, 75% gray. And I'm not using 18% linear gray because I know people are going to fight over that number. So I don't want to cause any battles. So I'm using kind of, you know, how people see mid-gray. Let's just call it 50% in, so we don't get into color science too much. Because my color science isn't great. So let's say mid-gray, 50% gray. When you're shooting this, it might be slightly overexposed or underexposed, so it's going to be above or below. So if you take that into an application such as Nuke or whatever you're using, let's just say Photoshop as well, Lightroom, is you can obviously tweak the exposure until this range comes to be a mid-gray value. And that's how you can set the exposure. And then at the same time, you can use a white balancing tool to then tell the software that's meant to be white, and therefore it will push the tint until it says, yeah, that looks white essentially. You could have a white piece of paper if you wanted to and say, that's my white. Obviously, the reason to use this is a scientific chart that's kind of been created in some kind of a fancy place. So therefore, it's more accurate than a white paper, which might not be perfectly white. If you're just using standard paper, you might have a hint of something in it. Okay, so I'm going to blast on. I'm just worried about time. This is just an example of using a HDRI 360. And again, a 360 I think is fine when you're doing exterior shots, because you might have the sun as a light source, and obviously that's, you know, gazillions of miles away. So that's fine. The other problem with 360s is obviously because it's wrapping all the way around, you might get light from beneath, which you shouldn't have. So you need to find a way to block all of that, or work with a hemisphere as well if your app allows it, which is useful. So this is just turning on. So again, you can see I've got this as well to receive shadow, and also that's going to bounce light back up. So it's going to create it's my kid messing about. Here's a result of that. So again, I've got this ground plane. I see a lot of look dev and HDRI where the asset is just floating in space. So you're wrapping the light completely around the asset, which is very rare. I would say you're going to get that. You know, usually you've got a ground plane. So it's important to have that, because that, you know, that changes how things are lit as well, blocking the light away. So this is actually using a HDRI plus a panorama. So the environment is a panorama. I'm not using the HDRI for the background plate because the quality is not going to be there. This is just using a HDRI. Now this HDRI, actually this is 4CG HDRI, but I've extracted the lights and I've put them in 3D space. So they're not on this HDRI. They are in, this was the room, this is the table, and the balls are here. They are here, here, and here. So they've been positioned in 3D space, so I get the correct kind of more accurate lighting happening, essentially. I'm going to skip some of this just because I'm worried about time. Here's an example of, instead of just shooting the 360, you can shoot individual light panels as well, and then position them in 3D space. So I do this as much as possible. You know, I'll set up the camera with a 24mm lens. I'll point it directly at the light source, and I'll just shoot a series of bracketed images of the light sources, or a 50mm lens I tend to use a lot, depending on how big the light is. And then that's the light in 3D space, used to light the assets. And again, it's going to give you a much more realistic, believable result. And actually, if I go back here, you can actually start to see the details that will be noticeable on your assets. Obviously, if you've got a very diffuse character, you're not going to see this stuff. But if you have something that's very reflective, like maybe Ultron or something, you know, like an Iron Man, then it's useful to have the kind of flat area lights be broken up with a real lighting source. So it just becomes more accurate. This is again another example of, instead of just using 360, using lights in 3D space. And in this case, I just have two area lights pointing at the asset. There's my asset here. This is the photography. And hopefully you can see, sorry. Oh, what happened there? Let me clear this. Yeah, the reason I set this up is I wanted the lighting to match the photography. And when you start rebuilding in 3D space, rather than just using that 360, your reflections start to line up and everything else starts to line up to match your reference. And the reason that's useful is the clients will always, if something doesn't line up, the client will give you a note and say the reflections don't look right. And it could just be that it's because your lighting doesn't line up. Or they might see there's too much red in the asset, and it could be because you haven't graded your data correctly. So the more you can just match the reference, the easier it's going to be to you know, sell your work essentially, because that's what you're trying to do as an artist. If you're working with VFX, you're trying to get it past your supervisor, the VFX supervisor, the director, and so on. So this is just some stuff from Clear Angle. This is their setup for shooting digidoubles. So that's where you would stand. And this is a HDRI that they capture. So they give people lighting reference as well. So you know where all the lights are during that shoot. And you can recreate this in CG. Here's an example of an individual light as well. So again, you can map this onto your area lights in Maya. And if you have the gray ball and the chrome ball, you can expose it correctly to line things up.